Hey, I finally got my hands on the new Viltrox 35mm F1.2 lap lens, which I've been pretty excited about trying out since it hit the market, because 35mm lenses are generally my preferred focal length. Like most of my shots are 35mm. I usually use the 35mm 1.4 G Master that I also use right now. But over the past 3 to 4 weeks, I mostly use the Viltrox lap lens here and kind of replaced my Sony G Master. So here I want to share my thoughts with you, mostly about the Viltrox lens because that's the new one, but at the end I will also do a little comparison with the 35mm 1.4 G Master. And yeah, I would say let's start this video by having a look at some shots I got with the Viltrox 35mm F1.2. So I would say let's start with the body of the Viltrox lens. It's a lab series lens where they put their most effort in, and you see that, like, the body is rock solid. It's all metal here. It has 2 function buttons, AF/MF switch. It has this display here on top, which I don't actually need it. I never really look at it, but it's nice to have. And you can also connect this lens to their Viltrox app, where you can set up the function buttons and also some screen customizations and stuff. So it's pretty cool. It also has a declickable aperture ring, which I definitely prefer because, you know, like, especially if you shoot a lot of video like I do, then sometimes you want to declick it so that you can smoothly change your exposure with the aperture. But I usually prefer having it clicked because most of the time I want my aperture to stay the same. And if I accidentally change the aperture, I want to feel it. So a clickable ring is definitely better. I do have to say I prefer rings that have clicks that are a little bit tougher, a little bit harder, and don't click as fast. Like here, maybe you can hear that. It is pretty easy to turn the wheel, so I think that could have done a little bit better, but it's not an actual issue. Like it actually never happened to me for the past month that I used this lens that I accidentally changed the aperture ring or so. So it's still good. It's just like it could feel a little bit nicer. And if you take this lens off, it also comes with a USB-C port, so for firmware upgrades, and also really good weather sealing actually, so you're well protected even when shooting in the rain. And one thing I don't really like about this lens is that they use a 77mm filter thread here. So you see I already use a step-up ring here. I think for such a big and relatively heavy lens like this one that could have been 82mm, then I would at least not need step-up rings. I think that should have worked because, as you can see here, the lens is actually a bit wider on the outer edge, while then it gets smaller where you screw the filter in. So I think 32mm would have fit well. No, the filter doesn't get on here. Anyway, talking about the weight, it's 910 grams. That is definitely heavy, and it costs around $1,000, which I think is a really fair price for the quality that you get with this lens. But, well, the weight is definitely something to consider versus the G Master and other lenses, but I will come to that towards the end of this video. And let's do a quick autofocus test here. Honestly, I tested so many Viltrox lenses over the years, and I never found that they cause any issues with autofocus, so I don't expect anything negative here now. Yeah, I think that should have been perfect. Sony autofocus plus Viltrox lens, that's generally good. So you can judge it yourself. Of course, it's just one autofocus situations. There are different ones like wildlife, etc. And I also tested focus breathing, and there in this test you can definitely see that this lens does have quite a bit of focus breathing, but it is definitely not unusable. Like, unless you really have to focus fully in and out relatively quickly, it's not really that noticeable like in most realistic shots. And the minimum focusing distance of this lens is 34 centimeters, which I would count as average. There are quite a few 35mm lenses available that do have a shorter one, so you're definitely not shooting macro with this lens, but 34 centimeters is also not bad. It's definitely usable for most of your portrait stuff, etc. But compare that to the Sony G Master 35mm F1.4 lens. There you get 27 centimeters. So if you oftentimes want to get a bit closer, then maybe the G Master might be better. But I think for most of your shots, that is perfectly fine. Like, even now, yeah, I mean, I'm almost kissing the lens now and I'm still in focus. So it's all right. So let's talk image quality of the Viltrox 35mm F1.2 lens. Now, I have a few remarks here. At first, I'm not really doing technical stuff anymore. I already mentioned that in my last lens review of the Viltrox 15mm F1.7 lens. The reason is at first simply that I think when it comes to quality, the only thing that really counts is that you like the images the lens produces, because some people like more clinical lenses that are like perfectly sharp, no chromatic aberrations, no distortions, nothing, everything perfect. Other people like to have lenses that have a bit more character, etc. So it's like, who are you judging the quality for, right? And the second one is simply that when it comes to sharpness, I never had a lens that I didn't find sharp enough, at least for all of my video work, but also even when I did photography. I think I never had a lens that didn't resolve the resolution of the camera sensor. And that's also the thing here. My highest resolution that I have here on Sony cameras is 33 megapixels. So I can't even test if this lens, for example, could resolve the resolution of 61 megapixels of the Sony R-line cameras, for example. So all those tests for sharpness in the lab don't really make sense. I will just talk about my real experience here. And from everything I can tell there, to me at least, and I'm one that generally likes a bit more clinical look. I mean, I like both. I also like anamorphic lenses that kind of distort a little bit towards the edges and stuff. But generally, I like it clinical in the sense that you have a really sharp in-focus area and a really nice soft out-of-focus area. And this lens definitely gives me that. I also have the impression, even on the camera screen with the Viltrox lens, that there is a bit more depth to the image. I'm not sure what it is. It could simply be because of the shallower depth of field, but it could also be that it has a bit more 3D pop. It's just really hard to tell exactly what it is, but I generally tend to like the videos a bit more from the Viltrox lens. However, what I also want to mention here is that when it comes to the depth of field of this lens, which is pretty deep at f1.2, it is in most shots not a big difference compared to the 1.4 from the G Master, but there are those few shots where your subject might be a bit farther away, and then with the f1.2 aperture you still get a bit more background blur than you would with the f1.4, where you almost don't really notice that anymore. And I do think that makes a difference, because if you look at this shot here right now, for example, there I can definitely tell that there is a certain amount of depth just because of the shallower depth of field. So in certain situations, I definitely prefer to have the f1.2 aperture, while most of the time it doesn't really matter actually between the f1.4 from G Master here and the f1.2 from the Viltrox. But what I also have to mention, I'm shooting on a Sony A9 Mark III here right now. The base ISO in S-Log3 is 2000, so oftentimes I still have to step down the aperture, or I have to raise the shutter speed slightly despite using a 9-stop ND filter, and that is also something to consider if you want to shoot with a lens that has such a wide open aperture. So overall, I have nothing to complain with this lens when it comes to video quality or image quality in general. Like, it's super sharp, the bokeh definitely looks nice, and also in all the shots I got, I did not notice any chromatic aberrations or so. Didn't look artificially for it, but that's exactly my point here. If you go through all of your shots and you never notice any chromatic aberrations, situations it also doesn't matter if you might see something on some lenses when you crop into 400% or something like that. And I didn't notice any, so it's perfectly fine on this lens. And I have to say the picture quality of this lens has to be good because it is a brick. Okay, now I would say let's test both lenses side by side. Here you're seeing the 35mm f1.4 G Master right now on the A7C Mark II, and here's the A9 Mark III with the Viltrox 35mm f1.2 lap lens. I would definitely say that the lap lens is a bit closer than the original G Master one. That's interesting. However, you might also notice some differences here because the cameras are different. And like generally from shooting both cameras side by side over a year, I definitely noticed that there is a difference. Like they don't look exactly the same, especially the A9. I feel like the shadows usually look a bit darker and the fall off into the shadows also. So keep that with a grain of salt here. It's not just about the lens, it's also the cameras here that make a difference. Anyway, let me also tell you, while we are having this comparison here, why the 35mm focal length is actually my favorite one. And I think that should either be your first lens, unless you really want to vlog and constantly film yourself while holding a camera, because there you definitely need something wider, or you want to go into wildlife or something like that. The reason is simply because it's a nice middle ground between wide angle lenses and the 50mm look that you oftentimes have to get a more like natural image, whatever that means. So I think like 24 I find oftentimes a bit too wide, like when I want to shoot B-roll for example, and I don't want to get a long shot, I want to get a bit closer to things, so textures and stuff. I feel like that 24mm is not good enough for that, it's too wide, and 50mm is oftentimes a bit too close already to get certain shots like long shots, etc., or just showing a bit more of the frame, and 35mm solves that pretty well. And what's also nice about 35mm is that if I want to get closer, if I want to be at about 50mm, I can always activate the APS-C crop in my cameras, and that brings me to around 50mm. And especially on the Viltrox lens, that is actually quite nice because that gives you the look of a 35mm f1.8 lens in full 50mm f1.8 lens in full frame terms, and these are still pretty nice lenses, like your usual nifty 50. On the Sony 35mm f1.4 G Master, it's still not bad. It still gets you to around 50mm f2.1 or something look, so it's still really nice. But well, having a full 50mm f1.8 look integrated into your lens is definitely a good one. And yeah, what do you think between both lenses now that you see them side by side? Do you prefer the Viltrox or the G Master? Let me know in the comments below. Also, if the G Master might already be enough for you, but I will come to my own conclusion about both lenses in a second in the conclusion of this video. So I would say there's only one question left, which is, after shooting with the Viltrox for about a month versus about a year with the G Master, what is my conclusion? Like, which lens would I get? And I have to say, I like the Viltrox definitely more when it comes to the image. And that's also why over the past few months, not just for testing, but also actually because I wanted it, I use this lens all the time. However, if I would have to decide to get one lens only, it would most likely be the G Master, because at first it is so much lighter. Like when I travel, especially if I go on longer hikes or I travel internationally or so, and that's definitely my preferred one, especially because it's not like a huge difference when it comes to the bokeh. And also, if you look at the prices when you buy this lens used, it is actually cheaper than $1,000. At least like here in Thailand, I got this one for $800 here, like used. It is generally a good idea to buy lenses used because they last for a very long time generally. So you don't necessarily have to buy new there. And so of course in a few months that will change, like the Viltrox lens will also get cheaper and you will be able to buy that used. So maybe in a few months you might get it used for like $600 or something like that. And then yeah, if you don't travel that much, if it's more like maybe you do weddings or like other on location shoots, then maybe yeah, I would definitely go for the Viltrox then, because I think quality wise you definitely get a bit more of this lens. It's also more flexible when it comes to the lower ISO, when you crop, etc., what I mentioned before. So yeah, in that case I would go for the Viltrox. But if it's like mostly travel focus, etc., what I do, then I would definitely go for the G Master first. So much for today. If you're also interested in the Viltrox 135mm F1.8 lab lens, check out this video in the corner. This is a really special lens. The shots that you can get with this thing are just fantastic, so definitely check that out. And yeah, it's time for me now to shoot the next video, so I see you hopefully there.